Welcome to the Regenerative Brands podcast. This is a place for consumers, operators, and investors to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. This is your host, Kyle, joined by my co-host, AC, who's going to take us into the episode.
On this episode, we have Samuel Taylor, who is the founder and CEO of Long Table. Long Table is supporting regenerative agriculture with their pancake and waffle mixes made with regeneratively-grown heirloom grains. In this episode, we learn how Samuel went from actor to CPG founder due to the combination of a pancake obsession and an acrobatic love interest. He details how the brand went from the farmer's market to appearing on Shark Tank, and he shares why regenerative, stone-milled heirloom grains are a game changer in terms of flavor, nutrition, and environmental impact. Lots of great stories in this one, folks. Samuel didn't land a deal on Shark Tank, but he scooped up the next best thing. The best pancakes I've ever had compliment from all of the sharks and $1 million sales bump. A little over a year later, he's looking to build out this brand both online and in retail while being a key purchaser supporting the regenerative grain shed of the upper Midwest. Let's go. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Regen Brands podcast. Very excited today to have our friend Samuel from Long Table with us. So welcome, Samuel.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I feel like, dare I say, 19th century Samuel, as he just informally introduced himself to us. But man, super pumped to have you on the pod. I was not familiar with the brand. Sometimes I like to almost not do research to see it at first and kind of be surprised when we start the episode. And I pulled up your website and I'm salivating. The imagery is phenomenal. So I'm really excited to share this story with our listeners. But for those who are unfamiliar with Long Table, give us a lay of the land. What sort of products do you produce, and where can our listeners find your product today?
Yeah, so Long Table is next-gen pancakes from heirloom grains rooted in love is really what we do. And
let's go. Love that.
Yeah, we do heirloom grains because they taste better and they're better for you and they're better for the earth. And there's just so much variety of flavor that has been lost in the last 100 years, where grains really kind of got pretty off track and kind of earned a poor reputation for many people. And, we're bringing some new stuff to the party as well. We are the only people in the world who do popcorn flour. We pop popcorn and then mill that into a flour. That's the backbone of our bestseller. It's delightful. It makes a really fluffy, delicate pancake that is whole grain, high protein, high fiber, checks all the boxes. And then we've also got a gluten-free. That's more of a diner cake style. That is, if what a diner cake wants to be when it grows up. It's got a little bit of teff seeds in there. It's very delicious. And then that leaves sort of, if one is brunch and the other is diner, the last category to hit is really my personal favorite. That's the blue corn pancake. That's a blue corn buckwheat, hazelnut meal and rye. And that's really in your lumberjack zone right there. And that's a stick to your ribs, get stuff done kind of a pancake.
Samuel, I gotta say, I've been going out to breakfast for a big portion of my life, but I've never been so enthralled listening to somebody talk about varieties of pancake as I just was that last 2 to 3 minutes.
I mean, this is the whole thing about heirloom grains is that we got, one thing that we grow mostly in this country for bread and pancakes and everything else. And there's so much more out there. And there's just it's all waiting for you. It's so delicious. Stop me. I'll talk again.
And I grew up on just basic, regular, whatever mainstream pancakes were. And so I'm especially ready to try these products because I'm sure it's totally different.
Well, in some ways, yeah. And in some ways, what we wanted to do is we wanted to really hit the places where the people want. This is okay. There's nothing wrong with traditional pancakes from an eating perspective. They're delicious, they're joyful, they're wonderful, they bring people joy. More pancakes in the world is a better world as far as I'm concerned, right? There are a handful of drawbacks to traditional pancakes. One is that roller coaster they put you on where you're super jazzed to eat pancakes and you're super happy you're eating pancakes. And then you are super full and then you are super sleepy. And then you're super hungry again. And all of that takes 1 hour, right?
Yeah.
So we do things a little bit differently. We want this to be a breakfast that does its job, right? I come from Chicago. We work in this city. We want to hire breakfast to do its job. And if breakfast is not doing its job, it's a tough world out there. Find a new home. We got to do it right in this house. So we do things that are high protein, whole grain, high fiber. They will last you. Now, the popcorn flour pancakes in particular do hit that spot that the old sort of childhood pancakes do. And the reason they do it is because the air that gets in the popcorn when it pops stays in through the pancake all the way to the finished product. And it creates a lighter weight, more delicate, fluffier whole grain pancake than really anything else on the market.
Okay, we're recording this episode at 8:50 a.m. and I'm genuinely upset that we did not all prepare pancakes like for this conversation. It's I'm like kicking myself for not having done this before. Also, it does say heirloom grain pancakes plus waffles, so I'm assuming we can use any of these mixes for waffles in addition to pancakes. Is that correct?
Yeah, of course. Waffle batter is not rocket science from pancake batter. You add a little bit more liquid, and if you real fancy, you can do some stuff like add a little bit of sparkling water to it, and that'll give you a little bit brighter, lighter weight, more sort of crispier texture if you like a crispy waffle. But that's only if you real fancy. If you're not real fancy, you just add a little more liquid to the batter.
Love it. That's wax mustache waffles versus regular waffles.
If it is a wax day, then break out the seltzer water.
Yeah,
right.
Well, we know that this comes from a place of love and kind of a love story background. So we'd love to have you fill the audience in on kind of how this pancake business came to be.
Yeah, I am a maniac, and I was eating pancakes 5 days a week for about 2 years, just with no glimmer in my eye whatsoever of starting a business. I was a Shakespearean actor and a puppeteer here in Chicago, and I just fell into a pancake hole. And while I was in that pancake hole, I met and fell in love with an acrobat. And I wanted her to come over to my house, and I wanted her to like me. And I wanted to cook for her. But we were doing a show together. We were doing a circus adaptation of Alice in Wonderland at Looking Glass Theater here in Chicago. And we were working in the evening, of course, so I couldn't impress her with my dinner cooking. So I thought, I'm unreasonably good at pancakes. Come over to my house. And I knew that, she was in the air 6 hours a day, right? We had a 10-mile commute on a bike to work, and then we were doing really strenuous work all day. And so I was like, okay, these better be high protein. They better be whole grain. They better be complex carbohydrates. If you're a real nerd about this stuff, I aimed for a 3-to-1 ratio of complex carbohydrates to protein, which is sort of what endurance athletes favor. But if you're not a real nerd, they just sort of, you don't get hungry before lunch.
Right.
And so that was when I invented popcorn flour. I was like, I want to feed her what she needs, but I also want to really impress her. And so I started putting popcorn in a blender and created those pancakes.
Popped popcorn.
Yeah, that's crucial. So popcorn meal is widely available. You just put popcorn kernels through a mill, and you wind up with a cornmeal that is made out of popcorn. It's sweet, it's delicious, it's really good. If you pop it first, it becomes fairy dust that is magical and delightful.
Yeah, I can just imagine your blender being kind of confused. Like, what am I even blending here? Is there anything in this? Like, what's happening?
Yeah. So I invented that so that she would be impressed. There was a lot going on in our love story, and it was a small part of our love story, but it was enough a part of our love story that when we got married, we gave out pancake mix as wedding favors.
Love that.
And that was around the time that we started a farmer's market stall to start selling the pancakes as well.
It's fascinating. I can listen to you wax poetic about breakfast and pancakes in this story like all day.
Well, let me tell you, I feel like there's two very different kinds of food founders in the world. And I feel like one of them worked at Kellogg for 20 years and sort of poached a team of 4 or 5 people and raised $2.5 million and launched in Target or whatever, right? Yeah. Like that's one. And it's like, from a business perspective, a real smart, good, solid way to do it.
Yeah.
The other way is my lane. And I feel like the world is just full of absolute lunatics who started food businesses with no idea what they were doing. And I cannot overstate to you the degree to which that is true. for me. I literally had never heard CPG before I started a pancake business. But there's kind of two founding stories. That's one. That's the founding story of the farmers market, right? My wife and I fell in love. We loved pancakes. We started selling them because we had our careers in the theater, and we didn't want to wait tables or what have you, the way some of our peers were. So instead of working in that industry, we worked in farmers markets. And then in 2020, of course, every live theater in the world shut down overnight, which, for every industry was a huge deal.
Yeah.
For the theater, it was really the apocalypse. Like, it was just gone. It was not going to go remote. We were not going to have staff meeting on Google Meet. Like, it was just gone. That was terrifying. And we had an 18-month-old kid, and I was learning more and more about regenerative agriculture at that time. And the world was freshly revealing itself every day as breakable. And I thought to myself, my kid, he was 18 months old at the time. I thought, this kid is going to be 16 one day, and he's going to look at me, and he's going to be smart enough and old enough one day to understand. Like, Dad, you knew about climate change your whole damn life. Well, what did you do about it? I want a good answer for him when he asks that question. And that was really the defining moment for me when I decided, okay, I'm going to go full time on Long Table. And I'm going to really do this and try to build something that is scalable and have a much larger, more important impact than I can by recycling. You know what I mean? And that's why the brand is called Long Table, incidentally. We sit at the table and we hand food down from one generation to the next. We also hand a world down, right? And we want to hand the best food and the best world down that we can.
Hell yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. And that hit home when you said that. I don't have a child. My dog's not going to have the same sort of intentionality with that question. But that was like a moment, and I really appreciate it. I don't want to deviate too far, but I also can't not ask this question from a curiosity perspective. When you were thinking about making the best pancake, why did you decide to blend popcorn? What was it about popcorn that was like, this is what I should put into a pancake?
Man, this brand has got too many stories, and this is another fun one. I didn't think I was inventing it. I thought that I had that as a kid. I thought that my friend Neil's dad, Barry Kirk, wonderful man, I thought that Barry used to put popcorn flour in pancakes and waffles, and they were. He would make. He's like a chef. He's ridiculous. If you ever got the chance to eat at his house, you took it. And I was like, those were the best ones. I gotta figure out how to do that. And then I did it in the blender, and it struck me as like, oh, that's cool. But then when we went to farmers markets, I needed to scale it up modestly, right? And I talked to 7 or 8 different millers around, and they all told me, this is impossible. You're crazy. Get out of my shop. So I built a machine. I built a machine by hand that is able to do that. And I was able to achieve some modest scale with it. I called Barry, and I was like, Barry, I figured it out. I figured out how to make popcorn flour, the stuff that you used to use. And Barry, stone cold, goes, what's popcorn flour? He'd never heard of it. It was a fantasy that was buried in some lizard part of my brain as a child that became real. I don't know. It's like magic. I don't know.
That's incredible. What during the pandemic or during the time off from the theater, what was the regenerative aha moment? Like, you said you were learning more about regenerative agriculture. How did that all start? Where did that come from?
It really started through getting introduced to the Artisan Grain Collaborative in its early phases through some of the farmers and millers that I worked with. I got turned on to heirloom grains and stone ground grains when I was working as an actor at American Players Theater in Spring Green, Wisconsin. And I biked 5 miles down to the local stone mill, and I met Gilbert Williams, and he's a real pioneer in the field. And he just stone cold. I was just trying to buy 5 pounds of flour, and he gave me a whole education in stone milling versus roller milling and the differences, and really reorganized my head about flour. So I started buying flour from him and from the farmers that he was working with. And he turned me on to the work of the Artisan Grain Collaborative. And the Artisan Grain Collaborative is an industry group of farmers, millers, bakers, chefs, distillers, brewers, producers, writers, dedicated to a regenerative grain shed in the upper Midwest. And I started getting curious about the farms I'd already been ordering this stuff from. I started getting more educated. I started learning about it. And it totally blew my mind because I can't overstate how big a deal this was to me at the time. Like the world is broken and breaking and really kind of scary when you think about what does it look like in 150 years, you know? And most industries, and most people, I think, have this apocalyptic sense in the back of their minds that kind of haunts them, even if we don't like to talk about it. And most people are trying to fight that with like, how can we prolong that timeline? How can we do a little bit less damage than we are doing now? Regenerative agriculture is different. You can actually flip the whole thing backwards, and you can actually say, we can actually, in this little corner of what we do in the world, we can actually turn this into a net benefit that actually starts to reclaim and improve on ground that we've lost in the last 100 years. I know precious few things in life that are like that and have that kind of promise. And, you know, it's by itself is not gonna make the world livable for the next generations. It's part of a patchwork of, you know, 5 or 6 things we really have to get right in the next 50, 100 years. But it's one of them. And if my mania of making pancakes 5 days a week for 2 years can be a small part of a movement that fixes a crack or two in the world, it's worth it. It's worth my time.
Yeah, same. That really resonates for me. And I had a similar aha moment where, as a consumer, there was a long period of time where I was like, okay, I need to do less harm. Maybe I'll stop eating beef. I'll stop, supporting the seafood industry, the very harmful industries. And then when I realized you can support systems that not only do less harm, but can actually have like a net positive and make positive change, that was a light switch moment for me. I was like, this is what I want to spend the rest of my life trying to figure out. How do we support this? So yeah, that totally resonates with me, and glad that you had same kind of moment on your end.
It was in my folks lived in this crazy space in Chicago that we used the back half of it for a warehouse for a long time. And I was up in what used to be my mom's sewing room. She had a lung transplant and nearly died. It was like the whole world was falling apart. And I was sort of in there just in a deeply, deeply bleak and hopeless time. And here along comes this thing. It's like, we've got this little business. It has a regenerative supply chain. It's this little tiny hopeful thing in a world that at the time was hard to find anything hopeful. And it gave me a sense of purpose through that whole long dark time, those couple of years before there were vaccines. It really gave me a sense of something to work for and something to do that pointed at something hopeful. And, there's no amount of gratitude for that is too much for me.
I want to try and understand the commercial arc of all that a little bit better too. So
it's a wild one. It's a bumpy ride to strap in.
Let me try and top line it if I'm following correctly. You were doing the farmers market thing. Yep. COVID happened. My guess is you went like e-commerce, like, something that route.
That's
At
correct.
some point, the Shark Tank inflection point was like 2023. And now you're doing omni-channel kind of retail and, brick and mortar retail and e-commerce. Take us kind of through that evolution, I guess.
Yeah. So we were predominantly in farmers markets, holiday gift markets, that sort of thing. We had a little bit of an online presence, but mostly so that our existing customers could order from us again. When 2020 happened, everybody started panic buying pantry items, and we were no exception. And so we sold out of what we thought was 6 months worth of supply in about a week, which was a modest amount, by anyone's standards. But guess what? All of our suppliers were also going through the same thing. And so we actually were unable to produce anything for about 7 months. And we had to wait for the harvest. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we got back online, and I started going a little bit harder on Instagram and just like straight up sort of micro business hustle. And I was able to
grassroots.
build the business to $90,000, which is totally tiny by real business standards. But it was meaningful for our family, and I then started getting a little bit better educated. I took some like founder education courses, some accelerator programs. And I started realizing, if you want to really build a business and play in this world, you're going to need capital. Yeah. And I was in the middle of that thought process when who should call my phone but David Schwimmer, America's friend, Ross from Friends. He is a fan of the Pancakes and a friend from Looking Glass Theater, where my wife and I are artistic associates, and he's one of the founding ensemble members.
Wow. Okay.
And he's loved the Pancakes for years, and is always very nice every time I see him. And he called and he said, like, "Hey, how are you doing? What if I posted about your business on Instagram?" And I was like, quick, find out how many followers David Schwimmer has. It's a lot. Yeah, I was like, I don't think we have inventory for that, my man. And we got into a longer conversation, and he said the thing that every small business owner in the United States hears 5 times a day, which is, you should go on Shark Tank. And every other time I heard that, I was like, fine, take a number. Sure. Next. Yeah. But he said, you should go to Shark Tank, and I could probably get the casting director's phone number. And if you go on, I'll go on with you, which is a whole different ballgame. So we applied, and we went through a very rigorous application process, which there's a very robust NDA that restricts me from talking about what that process is like. But we went on, and Schwimmer came on with us to say, like, hey, these are great. And all the sharks on that show said, these are the best pancakes I've ever had. Wow. There's a real feather in my cap that they did not say, these are the best healthy pancakes I've ever had. These are the best whole grain pancakes I've ever had. These are the best high protein pancakes I've ever had. Just like full stop. These are the best pancakes I have ever had.
Hell yeah. So
we saw a huge consumer response to the product. My wife came on the show. She did acrobatics. It was a wild time. And the smart money told us, if you really do it, if you really do well on that show, you'll walk away with $250,000 extra sales. And if, that'll be it. If you did that, you rang the bell, you did it, you were on Shark Tank. Yeah. We did $250,000 in sales before the first commercial break.
Wow.
It was a categorically different response than a lot of food brands see. It was kind of a perfect storm. And we had prepared $500,000 worth of inventory, and we had leveraged every bit of our inheritance to do so. We had really put everything into that, and we sold out of that within 24 hours. Wow. And over the course of the next 6 weeks, we did $1 million in sales. So I went from doing $90,000 in 1 year, and that was the most I'd done in 7 years.
Yeah.
To doing $1 million in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
If you can picture every supply chain problem that somebody would have in that situation, I had it.
Yeah.
And guess what? I had to figure out how to solve those problems because I was just me. It was just me in my living room trying to sort it out. Miraculously, we survived. We were out of stock for 3 months. People were very patient and understanding. And we got back on. And since then, we were able to retain a lot of that business and generate new business. We closed out last year at 1.7 million.
Nice.
Incredible.
Thank you. It was one of the most stressful, wild times of my life. Let me put it this way.
When did the episode air, Samuel?
It was in January of 2023 that it aired.
Okay. So it was like right at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. Let me put it to you this way. I used to make a living as an actor. One of my gigs, I would fall off an 18-foot ladder into a trap door on stage backwards.
Wow.
Shark Tank was wilder and scarier than that.
That's crazy.
But
nothing against David Schwimmer and nothing against Ross, but you didn't even have the best friend's character because Joey would have sold more pancakes.
That's
Like,
a fight you're gonna have to pick with David.
Well, we just lost the chance at a big donor for the new nonprofit thanks to Kyle's comment right there. Appreciate that, buddy.
I think David Swimmer's a great guy. I think he would agree that from a character perspective, Joey would have been the best character to sell pancakes. Now, I will have that talk with him if he wants to have it. And I think any listeners who have friends would agree.
I think that's probably correct.
What was I going to say? I was going to say something. I was going to talk about like it was transformational in so many more ways than just like the revenue that came in the door.
Yeah.
We were able to really invest, like the first round of packaging and the round of packaging that I took on the show, like I had literally designed by myself. And it was not great. It didn't tell a lot of stories. It had no kind of positioning for retail at all. So we were able to invest in a complete rebrand with a really great group here in Chicago called Seed House. They won an award for it recently for the rebrand.
Nice.
And between the stamp of approval from Shark Tank and that rebrand, people take our phone calls now. And as anyone out there listening who might be in a brand founding position, you know that people taking your phone calls or not taking your phone calls is I don't know, let's call it a good 60% of like what gets you in the door, what gets you on shelf is like, will you even talk to me? And so that's the enormous, huge gift that gave to us, is that people would talk to us. Banks would talk to us, retailers talk to us. The caliber of person that we're able to hire is raised because of all that. So it's absurd. It's a reality television show. It's crazy, but it changed our lives, and we're enormously grateful for that opportunity.
I think it's a fantastic story so far, and I don't want to skip out on one of our favorite pieces to talk about, and this is like the agronomy. So let's get into like why heirloom grains are different from non-heirloom grains. I'd love to spend a little bit of time on like why stone ground is different than traditionally milled, and just kind of get into the weeds there, if you will.
Well, I think those are two very different questions. Let's take stone ground first. And I struggle to communicate this in a succinct way because it requires a little bit of context. Yeah. But stone ground is really about the quality of the product that you get. Any grain can be stone ground. It doesn't have to be grown in any particular way. The way most grains that are on shelf now are produced is, in short, pretty much most of what's good for you and tastes good about the grain is removed. And then a kind of synthetic version of those vitamins and minerals are put back into the grain. They're shelf stable. So you get flour with a shelf life of 4 years. This is a trick and is about convenience, is about supply chain convenience.
Right.
Stone ground grains are very different. Without really getting into the technical differences between the mills, what goes into a stone mill comes out of the stone mill. So you're getting a whole food. That has got all three parts of the grain: the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. The germ is the part that is responsible for a shorter shelf life, but also carries the fats, which carry flavor, and it has the flavor and it has the fats to carry the flavor. The fats are the part that have a shorter shelf life. And then, of course, the bran, which is where the fiber is. Most of what can be called whole grain in this country is some of the bran is added back. It's poorly regulated as to how much of that bran is put back. And the germ is removed and you get vitamins and minerals pumped back in. These are very different categories of food. So that's stone milling.
Give me a quick, you mentioned when you have the germ still in the end product, it's got a shorter shelf life. You mentioned 4 year for traditional. What is it like when you have the germ still in? Is that 6 months? Is that 1 year? What does that difference look like?
Yeah, we set it at about 7 months from manufacture, and we're currently doing scientific testing on a variety of levels to understand, is that really the correct length of time? Because obviously I want as long a shelf life as we can get for the same reasons other people do. But that's a pretty conservative market where we're putting that. Put it in the fridge, it'll last a whole lot longer. Also, it doesn't go bad in a way that hurts you. It just it starts to taste a little off.
I mean, but that's also a significant competitive disadvantage business-wise. I mean, so like that's the reality of that. Yeah,
it's huge.
Well, especially like re-educating consumers who have had pancake mix in their pantry for a year or two or three to then be like, oh, I need to put this in my fridge, need to eat it faster. That being said, it sounds like they're so delicious. Consumption rate should be through the roof. People will go to eating pancakes 5 days a week.
Yeah, we resized the package to be a little bit more convenient for a family to use up the whole package in two batches as well for that reason.
Nice.
Okay, well, I super appreciate the high-level recap between traditional and stone ground milling. Let's get into the heirloom and regenerative grains versus traditional wheat.
Yeah, so essentially in the mid 20th century, we got real efficient at designing wheats that would have a huge amount of yield. And this happened with all sorts of grains. Corn, it happened most particularly with, but we can talk about wheat and corn. Those are sort of the two big ones. It turns out that when you maximize only for yield per acre, you may be losing some other things, and you lose a lot of things. Heirloom grains are harder to harvest. They stand taller. The equipment that you need is a little bit more finicky and takes more labor. The yield per acre is less. The size of the actual grain is a little bit less. So commercially, in a commodity supply chain where all you can compete on is price, they don't do as well, which is a real shame, because you can get a wide variety of different flavors, baking performances, textures out of these grains that you just can't get out of a regular grain. The difference between heirloom grains and conventional grains is the difference between an heirloom tomato and a conventional tomato. They just don't compare as far as taste and texture, right? How that happened is the story of chemical farming in the 20th century and commodity farmers not having any connection to their consumers. If you as a farmer can only compete on price, your only incentive is to grow the most per acre you can. So we're trying to reestablish a connection between the farmer and the consumer to give farmers a market for the stuff they want to grow. Because heirloom grains, like heirloom tomatoes, there's a ton of varieties of them. You've got different tastes, different textures, different baking performances. And they're naturally more resilient to pests and disease, where monocropping and cropping just one kind of wheat or corn year after year, you really have to rely on some pretty high octane stuff to keep pests at bay and so forth. Heirloom grains have a lot more natural resilience to that, particularly when you rotate them. And when you rotate different types of things through the soil, you need less fertilizer or no fertilizer in the soil. You need less chemical pesticide control. It's really a whole sort of natural system. Most of the baking mix aisle in particular is really not set up for that. And that's what we really bring. We're bringing farm to table sourcing and heirloom grains to the baking mix aisle, which really nobody else is doing.
I love that tomato comparison for a variety of reasons. And I think it provides, from an efficiency perspective, tomato growers were optimizing, like you mentioned, yield and inability to bruise, right? How do I get this transported from A to B without bruising so I can still, sell this at a price? And what suffered was taste and nutrition. And if you end up with a big red thing filled with water that doesn't taste like anything.
Yeah.
And what gets me excited about that analogy is if I think about that concept, and that's what regular pancakes are, is a big, empty, watery tomato. I would love to try the heirloom version of a pancake that is full of flavor, texture, and quality. So that's a really exciting comparison.
And there's so much more variety in taste. Like spelt tastes different from rye, tastes different from einkorn, tastes different from purple barley, tastes different from emmer wheat, tastes different from black wheat. There's so many. Turkey red is a short run we just did. There's so many different kinds, and that's just wheat. There's so many different kinds of heirloom grains out there that just brings so much more variety and delight to the table than something that somebody grew because that is what grows the most per acre when you pump it full of chemicals.
Right.
How have you decided what to use in products? Because I think almost everything you just said, I feel like I've seen on an LOI of your packaging. Like, was it because the collaborative said, hey, our group of farmers are all growing this, and here's like a good mix, and this is the type of like biodiversity they want to have? Like, was it working really intimately with one of those farmers? Like, how have you translated the agronomic need to the actual product innovation, pipeline or whatever?
First and foremost, it's culinary. Right. It's about achieving a balance that is satisfying and complex. And one of them really ticks the sort of brunch category. The other really ticks the lumberjack category. And those I ported over as recipes from that time that I had spent for 2 years eating pancakes 5 days a week, I came up with a bunch of recipes. Those were sort of my two favorites, and I retooled those for bigger production batches. For example, the popcorn flours really gives it a depth of taste and savoriness, and really is a magic trick for the texture. The oat flour that's in that one brings a real natural sweetness and mellowness to it. The wheat flour really provides its structure and gives it a nostalgic taste. The almond flour adds a little bit more sweetness, and the fats in there help the flavor carry through. So that's how I built a lot of our products. That's for our core lineup of SKUs. I'm really excited about the short runs that we do. So for the short runs, they're direct to consumer only because we do them in small batches and they're not really suited in that way for retail. But we'll go to one farm and we'll interview that farmer and we'll go out on the field where that grain was grown. We'll do one grain from one regenerative farm and we'll feature the flavor of just that grain. So we did spelt, we did a dark rye, we did a Kernza pancake mix with Wilden Hughes out of Wisconsin, and the Perennial Promise Growers Cooperative. Kernza is a whole other cool story that we could talk about. Yeah, we did a turkey red wheat, which is the strain of turkey that everyone in your family tree going back 500 years has eaten if your family lived in a part of the world where they ate wheat. And those flavors are really cool to just sort of showcase one at a time. And my hope is to get enough traction going and enough sort of weight behind the brand, enough staff on hand to really crank those out and feature 25 different, grains in the next 2 years. My dream is to be able to go to a farm and say, great, we want to buy out your whole crop of buckwheat, rye, and wheat, because these things are seeded at different times and harvested at different times. We want to tell the story of crop rotation through a series of different flavors that our customers can get on board for. We're not quite at the scale where we can really buy the whole crop from a farm in that way, but that's my dream.
In the weeds operational question, how many mills are you sourcing from? And is that like very important, necessary kind of centralization for you to have that diversity of ingredients?
Yeah, so mills are really the choke point of supply chain for anybody dealing in grains. And there are two really excellent mills that we work with quite heavily here in the Midwest. One is Janie's Mill, which is an organic mill down in Ashcombe, Illinois. And the other is Meadowlark, which is another organic mill and farm. They're both farm and mill operations, actually. And that one, Meadowlark, is in Wisconsin. There's a real dearth of processing and storage in particular for heirloom grains. Because guess what? Pests don't like conventional modern grains. They prefer the heirloom grains because they taste better.
Wonder why. Yeah.
So there's a real problem. There's not enough milling and there's not enough storage, particularly cold storage for the existing farmers that want to be growing these kinds of grains. If I could, Kyle, I want to touch on something you asked about that I didn't really cover, which is what are some of the farming practices that go into here. So heirloom grains typically have better root structures that feed carbon and other nutrients into the soil than other types of grains do. There's a lot of other stuff that our farmers do that is in the regenerative lane. So they are cover cropping, they're using composting, they are not using pesticides, they're using low or no tillage. It's really all, like, every farmer I talk to talks about soil and how do you build and maintain soil. And the best way that I've found to talk to customers and people at large about that is, like, you need a varied diet to do well.
Right.
Same is true for plants. Plants need a complex web of micronutrients and biological sort of, microfauna in the soil in order to do well, in order to be at their best, and to give you what you need for your complex gut biome, right? So if you were to only eat protein powder and vitamin pills, how do you think you would feel?
Yeah.
How do you think that would go for you, right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's what we're doing to most plants. And so our farmers who are growing these more complex plants with more complex soil, who are rotating them in complex ways, are really creating the kind of food that your body is crying out for. And it's because they're giving the plants the kind of food that they are crying out for.
I love that. And yeah, I think the analogy, and you sort of alluded to this, is like the soil is the external digestive system for the plants. And if we don't treat that microbiome environment like we would our own gut, like we can expect similar levels of sickness for the plant that we would in ourselves.
Yeah,
Right?
it turns out complexity and diversity is the bedrock of health, both for us and for the planet.
Yeah,
Totally. And I think as a society, we have spent so much time focusing on efficiency as a byproduct of capitalism that we've ended up in this world where efficiency has trumped everything else. And now
I will
we're dealing
fight
with
you.
those
I will
consequences.
fight you. Here's the amazing thing. We've like when you know, okay, so this is an analogy Wilden Hughes gave me about conventional farming versus regenerative farming. Conventional farming is a gas tank. The soil is a tank. You put fertilizer in, you pull plants out. You put fertilizer in, you pull plants out. It gets empty, right? The problem with that, and this is why so many conventional farmers are starting to turn to farmers like Harold Wilkins from Janie's Farm and Mill, is that there's nothing left in the ground. The yields are starting to go down and down and down on conventional grain farming in particular.
right.
And so as a means of increasing yield, farmers are starting to turn to more regenerative practices. This is the long-term solution to our yield problems. The long-term solution to our yield problems is not more nitrogen.
Right.
Fight me if you want.
Yeah.
I'll join you in that fight any day.
Great.
Yeah, we agree. It's like there's a lot of different pathways in regen, but ultimately what's going to stick long term is always going to be about higher farm productivity and profitability. It just might look like a different toolkit than how that's really defined today. I mean, that's what we've seen in countless episodes and kind of what we've seen in the movement. I want to pivot back to the commercial side and kind of bring it to present day of like, what has the brick and mortar landscape look like? How have you attacked that? Did you start regional and you're about to go national? Like, where are you at with brick and mortar? How does that play off of e-com? And how does like the regenerative story tie into all that? So,
yeah, one of the benefits of having had a sort of long ramp for me as a founder is that I have had time to see a lot of mistakes, and I have had time to learn a lot. And there are a lot of different valleys of death that are littered with brands in this space. And I'm trying to construct a strategy that is as thoughtful as possible about those. And one of those valleys of death is chasing doors and running out of cash flow.
Correct.
And so we are taking an approach to retail growth, which is obviously the future of the business because people buy food in grocery stores. It's quite an odd and flattering thing that so many people are willing to buy pancake mix online from us. But I understand that's not where the bulk of where we need to be is. Right. So what we are doing is we launched in Fresh Time markets, all 70 of them here in the Midwest. Nice. We're doing well in there. And we are really learning the ropes of how to get consumers to notice it on shelf, how to merchandise it where it needs to be, how to really follow through on that. And there's a lot of learning curves there, particularly when your background is in Shakespeare and puppetry. So
could be a distinct competitive advantage. Like, I mean, are we demoing pancakes in a Shakespeare outfit? Like, what are we? How are we leveraging that?
Boy, that's a great question. So we're taking a thoughtful approach to building the blueprint for success. And so we launched in Fresh Time. We are stabilizing there and learned a lot from there. We are about to launch as soon as they can get the product from our next production run. We're about to launch in Central markets in Texas. Nice. And those are two of our biggest sort of clients. We are also growing in the kind of like boutique bodega style business. That's a little bit easier and a little bit less cash flow intensive to sort of gain some customers there. Yeah. So I think for us, we are trying to bring as many customers to the party as possible. So we're focusing on D2C really heavily for the next year or two. And as we focus on that, we're building the base of people that's going to be brand ambassadors, going to be excited about the product, is going to move it, it's going to tell their friends about it when it launches near them. And we're really syncing the data about where are our customer zip codes down to where are they requesting us on shelf and what are the chains there that we feel we can actually support. And how can we get enough of those together to open up a distribution center in that area? So for us, it's not two sales channels, it's one strategy, right? Like you need the customers and the data to understand where you can launch and how you can pull through to the people who already love your product. This is this is a strategy that I think, Graza recently has done really well. And I think we're trying to lift a page from that book. The thing that I think is not suited to where we are at right now as a country and as a movement with regenerative agriculture is the like burn through stacks of venture capital to get big fast.
Yeah.
I thought there was some really interesting data that came out this last spring that said, of people surveyed, it was a pretty big survey, something like 11% of people had any idea what regenerative agriculture was. But of those 11%, I think it was 57% of people said they structure their purchases around it. So this is a picture of a small and committed movement, right? This is a picture of people who care and are willing to make choices differently based on their values. Those people are the people who are going to tell their friends about things. Those people are the people who give these products as gifts at holidays, at birthdays, at Father's Day, Mother's Day. Those are our core customers right now. There are not enough of those customers right now to support a brand whose margins take a hit on higher pricing and whose cost is higher than their competitors on shelf at Target.
Right.
There's just not enough of those people right now. So we're trying to stay with where the demand is and where the customers are. And right now, a lot of those people are D2C. And they're starting to move into place with the advent of new certifications and so forth. They're starting to move into Sprouts, Whole Foods, some of the sort of regional chains like a Fresh Time, like a Central Markets. So we want to follow where that is, and I think we're at an inflection point where that's going to start to grow a lot more quickly than it has in the last 5 or 10 years. But we don't want to get ahead of that and tank the business because we ran out of cash.
I think it's a super smart move from a strategic perspective. I love what you said about starting regionally, gaining stability in those marketplaces, sticking with DTC, which is a higher profit margin channel to fund some of that expansion when and where it makes sense. The intentionality, I think, is spot on. And as a first-time founder, I think you're doing a really great job in that capacity.
Well, thanks. I take a lesson actually from Broadway in that, which is that a number of years ago, Broadway casting directors started asking, "What's your social media reach?" at auditions, and that's because if you're auditioning for a big banner Broadway show, you're not going to get any bad actors in the door, right? They're all going to be crackerjack. They're awesome. It's New York City. It's the center of the theatrical world, right? So what producers look at is who can put more butts in seats, right? And I think retail buyers are doing the same thing. They're looking at brands and they're saying, like, sure, your product is great. There's lots of great products out there. How are you going to move it off my shelf? What's your DTC following? What's your social media following? What's your ranking like on Amazon? So we understand we have to fund and bring a lot of that to the party before we're really going to be able to compete in bigger retail markets.
Totally makes sense. And you touched on this a little bit with certification. You had mentioned certification a moment ago, and it's another one of those key, attributes and or certifications or verifications during these conversations with buyers when saying, what are you doing differently than the rest of the category? Why are people going to buy your product over something else? So talk to us a little bit about where you're at with certification and why you decided to take the route that you're taking.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to feel like 5 years ago, I was in the wilderness way out front of where the movement was. And now I feel like, oh, dang, I got to run to catch up. And that's an awesome feeling to feel like there's that kind of momentum and that kind of wave happening, which is really cool. I think the certifications are really key for establishing differentiation. They're really key to combating greenwashing. And I think they're really key to building the kind of visual marker on shelf that a person who's got a 2-year-old who's losing their mind in their grocery cart to be able to sort of see and recognize quickly. Super key because it's a complex conversation. And once someone has taken the time to understand some of the complexity of regenerative agriculture, the reality of shopping is that you need an indicator you can trust within a second, So I'm really excited about all the new certifications coming out. We have certainly settled on the certification that we are going to be pursuing. We have a memorandum of understanding as far as shifting over our supply chain to Regenified. Nice. It takes a little different approach than I think the biggest one that has made the most noise in the space has been, Regenerative Organic Certified. I think they're two subtly different approaches to regenerative agriculture. And I think there's space for both. I think they're both super valid. My value system and how I view systemic change pushes me towards one more than the other. And I feel like building on top of organic certification is a great marker of top of the line quality and tip of the spear, as far as like we are the standard bearers for the highest standard. It doesn't create an easy on-ramp for farmers who have been farming conventionally and want to do the work. Right. They see the quality of their soil degrading. They have kids. They have these concerns. They want to get on the boat. Regenified is a really interesting structure in that you can get on the boat and start using the certification when you have started that process. And in order to keep the certification, you have to continue improving until you have really arrived at where you want to go. And if you backslide or if you don't make progress, you lose the certification. This to me is a really compelling model for bringing more and more and more acres into the system more swiftly. I think there's room for both and both serve a function. The thing that I would really hate to see would be for the conversation to focus only on consumer health and wellness. I think there's folks out there now who are talking about regenerative as a means of, as kind of a health optimization and wellness phenomenon only. I think in the same way that like non-GMO foods are safe to eat, even if they are frequently tasteless and not very good and so forth, but they are safe to eat as a person. The problem is not that they are unsafe. The problem is that they are evil. In the same way, I think there's a complexity to the regenerative question where those foods are better for you and do have better nutrients value and do avoid all sorts of toxic chemicals and things that we don't want in our bodies. We also don't want those in our global system.
Right.
So if the movement is unable to address things systemically, then we will carve out a new and interesting way of wealthy people being able to sort of further their health advantage that they have over less advantaged people. If, on the other hand, we get the bigger players involved and we create an on-ramp for Cargill, for Monsanto, if we create an on-ramp for farmers who've been farming in that way for the last generation, we stand a chance at really leaving the land a little better for the next generation on a systemic level.
I think you're spot on, and we've talked about this a lot on the pod. There's depending on who you ask, this number will change, but it's roughly 98.4% of arable land in the world is not organic. And to your point, if you set the bar that in order to become regenerative, you have to start at organic, you're going to make a fraction of that, less than 2% of arable land better. Yeah. And from an impact perspective, like it's not going to help that many people. It's not going to help that much land, and I think that you're thinking about this the way the AC and I think about this, is that this is a movement and it's about transitioning acreage rather than making an extra ultra premium for the very few who can afford that. Right. So
I think the thing that complicates that for me is the people who are on that leading edge are effectively the incubating chamber that educates the rest of the world about that kind of agronomy. Right? Like we wouldn't have this conversation about being able to translate huge amounts of hectares to regenerative if in the early 60s people had said like, it's not worth it to invest in organic farming. It's like there's no knowledge. It's just such a tiny sliver. Like we need those people out on that front. We also need much vaster quantities of farmland to convert if we're to make any difference for our great grandkids.
Yeah, it's a both and. You said it really well, right? And there's even more than those two certification programs that we feel like deserve a seat at the table and have value as well. And ultimately, translating it into consumer claims is not always equal to just doing net positive work on the ground. Like not all the net positive work on the ground needs to get translated into a consumer claim. Yeah. And we also need to protect the consumer claims that are legit and meaningful to those businesses and those farmers and those supply chains. So
this is exactly the conversation I have with my farmers.
Yeah, it's dense, right? And it's multifaceted and it's complex. I will push back on the health and wellness thing. Just real quick.
Please do.
Which I agree with your overall point, and I think it's once again a both end of like what do we know works right now? We know premium products that have a health and wellness benefit. Like that is the playbook. And that's the playbook we need to run with because it's the playbook that's going to allow commercial success that we need these enterprises to have so they can continue to source this way. And it might not be what gets us all the way home. Right. So
yeah, I think this is where my sort of hard-nosed business sense starts to come in, which is that people buy products because it's better for them, right? Mm-hmm. People buy products because it tastes better, because it's healthier for them. Mm-hmm. That is a really important angle and is true about regenerative agriculture foods, right? The only thing I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that it is you and it is the people who don't yet live on the planet but will. We need to be watching out for both of those people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if the gateway in is the self-interested market attributes, and then there's that loyalty piece after the fact where you also learn because you're making your pancakes, you're eating your pancakes, the long table bag sitting on the table, whatever, and you're reading like, oh, this also has an environmental impact in a positive way. Like that's really cool. It could be that loyalty piece once they've gotten to trial, right?
Yeah. So let me, I feel like particularly in this kind of environment where we're talking about regen, it can sound like Long Table as a brand is all about regen. This is all we do. In fact, like you kind of got to go one or two layers deep into the brand before you really get to this stuff. You got to be on our email list before you really get this. And even then you're going to get a short blurb about that. And if you click through to the blog entry about that, you're going to get more detail. If you want to listen to the interview with the farmer, that's accessible to you. But listen, it's not really the front of the bag. The front of the bag is whimsical, is delightful, gives you a sense of craft quality, tells you how much protein and how much fiber are in there. I know that that's what people are buying when they're looking at the front of the bag. What I want to make sure is that when they flip the bag over, if they go into the rabbit hole, we want them to understand that there really is something there, because those are the people that are going to talk about it to their friends. So it's a staged sort of response. And, we did not get an investment on Shark Tank, and Mark Cuban went out because he said you're too focused on the values and not enough on the business. And I'm gonna at you right now, Mark Cuban. The only way to achieve the values of this business is to be commercially successful and to grow very big. And I think that the values that I have that makes me care about more than just financial return on this business, they don't divert my focus. They create a stronger sense of focus on how does this actually move and transform. And the way that it moves and transforms is clearly by being a better product, by solving a problem for a customer and speaking to their values.
And for being the most delicious pancake mix that anybody on that show has ever tried. Right?
More than just that show, my friend. More than just that show. I made over 1 million tiny pancakes in farmers markets over the years. So I got to talk to a lot of customers. And my favorite response was always people like taking it and going like, I'm going to try this. And then going, what's in that? Like, I would love it when people would get mad about how good it was.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about how we got to where we are today. You've also mentioned all these different varieties of heirloom grains, and I'm just curious from like a future perspective. We talked a little bit about Central Market coming on board, a little bit of strategy there, but what is in the immediate future for Long Table? Is it more SKUs? Is it focusing on more with corrugating distribution? What are you focusing on for maybe like the next 1 to 3 years?
Yeah, great question. We're going to continue to rotate in new grains, partly as a testing ground for which of these do best and which of these might be suitable for retail.
And sorry to interrupt you immediately, but when you say rotating new grains, is that changing the existing formula, or is that like bringing in like a seasonal rotational SKU? What does that look like?
That's it. So we have a short run program where we've done about 3 or 4 a year for the last couple of years, where we go out to the farm and we feature the work of one farmer and one grain from that farm. And we tell that story and we showcase that flavor in that story. That's a really great incubating ground for us to understand what are the next products that people really respond to, what are the next products that we might want to bring to retail. And so that's kind of our incubation lab there for new SKUs in the pancake and waffle department. We see a lot of avenues for growth long-term for us. The short-term goals of growth for us are the most critical to get right in order to make it possible for us to expand in the long-term into other things. Long-term, there's no reason why we can't move into other types of foods, into ready-to-eat snack foods that are built on heirloom grains, etc. In the meantime, there's a lot of runway left for us in our core SKUs that we already have. We've actually got a ton more retailers asking us when we can launch than we can afford to support right now. We have just barely begun to scratch the surface of what's possible to do on Amazon. We have just barely begun to scratch the surface of what's possible to do with like paid customer acquisition, really advertising and marketing in that like real hard-nosed e-com way. In order to do all that stuff, it's time for us to bring capital in the door for the first time. I started the business with $5,000, and that's the only capital that's really ever gone into the business outside of some debt.
Wow.
And we're fortunate to have grown from that to a $1.7 million brand. Right.
Yeah.
But the time is now, and the time is ripe for us to take on bigger opportunities that are profitable, but not cash flow positive for a while. Right. Mm-hmm. So I'm in the middle of my first ever round of fundraising, which is an exciting and mentally bruising process.
Yeah.
And that's a big avenue for Runway. Another really big avenue for us that I'm really excited about is brand partnerships with like-minded brands who are working in the same space. And being able to bring, co-branded products and product packages that are, one thing from us, one thing from another person into the direct-to-consumer space, bring people a little variety, a little bit more for them to order from us, and introduce them to a like-minded brand whose products are also going to love. That's going to be great for us. And then the other thing that we will continue to do, and I hope we get to do with more speed and turns into a proper subscription program, is those short run programs. So featuring the work of individual farmers, really telling their stories, documenting them, adding complexity and depth to the conversation for people who want it about regenerative agriculture. And for people who just want more variety and flavor in their life, deliver you that too. Mm-hmm. There is, I think, a food service play that's possible for us, but probably not in the immediate near future. Popcorn flour is such a magic trick, and we're the only people who do it, that we'd be mad not to consider at some point putting that out into the world as a thing that you can make in your diner, as a thing that you can make in your brunch spot. Logistically, the minimums that we have to hit in order to make that commercially viable are quite high. And you need somebody on staff who really speaks that language, who can really push sales in that department. We're a team of 3 people right now. Yeah. So that's one of the valleys of death, chasing shiny objects for founders. There's like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do the other thing. Right. We're going to focus on what our customers want, which is variety. And we're going to focus on what the retailers want, which is consistency and moving off shelf.
Samuel, this has been an awesome episode, man. Love what you're up to. Super informative, super fun. Lots of great stories.
I'm such an admirer of what you've built in terms of bringing people together to have a complex conversation about this and provide a space to really connect the dots between the values that drive a really necessary movement and the things that people can buy to be a part of that movement. They are so intimately connected, and it's so hard to connect those dots. And I think you guys have done a really amazing job doing that for people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Super appreciate that, man.
Good segue into the final question. And really interesting to say this is episode 80. So we've had quite a few answers to this one at this point, which is crazy to think about. But would love to get your take on it, which is, how do we get Regen brands to have 50% market share by 2050?
Oof. What a beautiful goal and an amazing thing. I think we are in the opening moves of a chess game, and the opening moves have to do with brands like Long Table and other brands that you've had on this podcast being a lot more successful than their competitors. Mm-hmm. And I think that will attract the attention of the bigger players. And we really need to get those bigger players on board. And we need to prove that they should get on board by outpacing them. Mm. In order to do that, there's probably a complex web of things that need to happen. One is processing and supply chain sort of developments that are happening and need to be better funded and better organized. Yeah. Another is better financing for regenerative brands. I think, to put it bluntly, the people who invest are rich people.
Yeah.
And I genuinely think that rich people want to sleep at night too.
Yeah.
And I think we need, as brands, to present to them the strong case that it is not a choice between return on investment and being able to sleep at night. We need to give them both. And there needs to be a better community of interconnected, values-minded funders out there who are giving each other introductions and who are passionately making that case to one another. That's, I think, where we're at now. That may be my experience of that may be colored by the fact that I'm in the middle of a fundraise, and it may not be the most critical thing. But we live in America, baby, and America runs on money, and money is the juice that makes the engine go. Yeah. We need more of the juice in the engine, and we need the supply chain is the engine. Supply chain and brands are the engine, and we need to fund them properly, and then we need to get faster and better and tastier than the competition. And then they'll take notice, and then they will catch up, and then it will be on shelf at Walmart and Costco, because that's where people spend the money on the food, is Walmart and Costco.
Yeah. Yep. And you're right on the financial pieces. I mean, that's basically what we're going to try and work on with Regen Brands Capital, which we'll share a lot more about here soon. But yeah, it's been a huge theme, hyper validated by all the episodes and all the conversations we've had, that the capital is not there, and also the financial products are not there for brands that are going to lead to the outcomes that we all desire. So it's yes, that community and that capital, and it's also the financial products and the strategies that we're using, because right now they're not working.
Yeah, and I think the financial instruments that exist right now can be repurposed into this world in a way that works for everyone. But they are, the tech boom and the sort of app boom taught investors how to think about investing in a way that is fundamentally disconnected from food, right? Like, it's disconnected from reality.
Especially regenerative food.
Yeah, it's like you can't do that stuff overnight the way that you can scale the number of users you have on an app by sliding an advertising budget up. It just doesn't work that way. And the financial instruments all assume that it does. And so they're a poor fit. There's a lot better minds than I out there who understand how to work those financial instruments in a better and deeper way. I feel the struggle talking to investors about mismatched expectations. I am not the person who's going to give you that solution. I am the person who will use that solution.
Yeah. Well, man, super appreciate the time. This has been fascinating. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I want to point all of our listeners to longtablepancakes.com, where in the middle of the episode, during one of your, I don't want to call it a monologue about pancakes, but one of your pancake moments, I actually already...
It was a soliloquy.
I would take...
That's a much better.
I would take aria as well, if you wanted to do aria.
I honestly don't even know what that means, but I'll take
I've never heard that word. Kyle and I are uncultured, Samuel. We're not,
fun projects. Look it up.
We're non-fermented. But long story short, I bought the variety pack while we were on the episode, and I was thrilled that via Prime, I get it delivered tomorrow. So I'm going to enjoy these pancakes over the weekend for the first time. And I'm also going to buy, shout out to one of my best friends, Taylor, he is a pancake fiend. I cannot wait to send him a package to hear what he has to say. So longtablepancakes.com, check it out.
Here's our mark for quality. Sure, it's good. Would you serve it to your own mother on Mother's Day? If it's that good, it's good enough to go in a bag. If it's not that good, we don't ship it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Samuel. This has been awesome, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
For show notes, episode transcripts, and more information on our guests and what we discuss on the show, check out our website, regen-brands.com. That is regen-brands.com. You can also find our Regen recaps on the website. Regen recaps take less than 5 minutes to read and cover all the key points of the full hour-long conversations. You can check out our YouTube channel, Regen Brands Podcast, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, subscribe to future episodes, and share the show with your friends. Thanks for tuning in to the Regen Brands Podcast, brought to you by the Regen Coalition and Outlaw Ventures. We hope you learned something new in this episode, and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.